Hello friends, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I thought it'd be fun to go over kind of my process in Procreate, how I go from sketches like this to more full-on illustrated drawings. So I wanted to show my process of kind of how I go through the line work and then color, do shadows and highlights and just finish up the piece, as well as go over some of my settings in Procreate, some of the brushes I use, things like that. I thought this would be really helpful and hopefully interesting and educational because I really like watching videos like this of my favorite artists, so I thought it'd be fun to do something like this, especially because some people have recently been asking me what brushes I use and kind of how I do some of my shadows and things like that. So I thought it'd just be fun to do a really quick video. I don't want this to be super long, hopefully. If you're interested and want a more in-depth tutorial, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do that. Or like a specific type of art. Right now I'm just gonna be doing these like fun Pokemon and Shiba drawings, but I've also been doing a lot of more stylized portraits recently, like this one, for example. So I'd be happy to like go over how I like rendered the skin and things like that if people are interested. So just let me know. If for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kyle. I'm a part-time artist here on YouTube, and I make videos like this, kind of doing how-tos and tutorials and showing my art process, as well as showing kind of behind the scenes of setting up my art shop for the first time, selling at markets and conventions, things like that. So if you're not subscribed and you want more content like this, or just want to support me, I'd really appreciate it. We can be best friends, and yes, feel free to subscribe. So first things first, my canvas. The canvas I generally use, if I'm doing like a die cut sticker or like a small print, for example, I sometimes use a square canvas of like 4,000 by 4,000 pixels. And then I always use 300 or 600 DPI. If I'm doing something more, like, I guess if I'm gonna potentially turn it into a print, I typically use a canvas that's either 4 by 6 inches or 4,000 by 6,000 pixels, like that ratio, or 5 by 7, depending on like the print I'm gonna be doing. So yeah, and then in terms of brushes that I use, these are my recent brushes, and these are the ones that I've like favorited. So my typical brush I use for all like sketching and line work is the dry ink brush. I think it's in calligraphy. It's a default brush in Procreate. And then I also, for just like coloring and shading and everything, I usually just use the round brush. I sometimes use the soft airbrush with like a low opacity. You can see over here I have it pretty low. I have it in the 40s right now. But I typically use just like the dry ink brush and the round brush. Sometimes I'll use like things again, like the soft brush if I want to do some sort of like subtle highlights or like a blush type thing on a person, or like kind of just give like a glow effect. I'll sometimes use a soft airbrush. Or sometimes I use this light brush if I want to use a more like, again, like a glow type effect or more of like a reflection. I really also like this Lithotone set. It has a bunch of textures. I'll link it in the description, but I really like this one. I also will often, if I am like doing sketches or even coloring, I'll pull up this little, I'll pull up like the screen on the side. I usually make it like this, like 1/3 and 2/3 or whatever that ratio is. And like this will be like a reference image. You can also put reference images in your, like in here, if you go to add canvas, yeah, and then turn on reference, and then you can pick an image and it'll pop up in here. But I generally just put it over here so I can swipe through things if I have different ones I want to use. Because we're doing like a tutorial, I'm just gonna turn that off for now. So yeah, that's typically my setup. I typically put all my sketches in like one layer, but in this case, I wanted to do a couple different like scenes, I guess. So I put them in different layers. So after I do that, like after I sketch everything out, the typical process is I turn the opacity down really low. Let's turn these guys off for now. And then I create a new layer, and then I just like sketch on top of it, or not sketch, I do the line work on top of it. My sketches are pretty rough usually. I think like one thing I would recommend if you're doing this is like just make sure, like you should try to clean up your sketch as much as possible. I didn't here just because like we're doing like a little mini like quick tutorial, but it is really nice to have like a really clean sketch. So I'm gonna do these outlines, and then I'll get back to you in a few minutes. Okay, so now that I have like I guess rough outlines, um, I often what I do is I turn off the sketch layer, and it usually looks like so much worse. Just 'cause I think your sketch kind of helps fill in a little bit of like the parts that like might not be perfect lines, and your brain can kind of interpret it better. But like now it's just like one line; it's harder to do. You can see my line work is pretty rough still. I generally do pretty like rough line work in general. I think like my line work isn't like super perfect ever, but I think I kind of like it that way. But generally in this phase, what I'll do now is that I have like a sketch down or a line work down. I'll generally go back in and kind of like refine it like I'm doing now, kind of just like playing with it, like modifying shapes a little bit with the sketch off to see like what I like. And this is also where I like often put in a lot of like line weight stuff, or like this, like I'll color in like corner, like where stuff like meets like corners. And then I'll often do like little hatches like that to for like kind of like shading, but not like actual shading, but just kind of like where I'm gonna like shade things. But I'll often like make lines like where lines meet, I'll make them thicker, or like where there's corners, I often like to put like just like little like accents like that in a lot of places. So it just depends. It's just kind of my style, but this is typically like what I'll do at this phase. The other thing that I also like to do, and I did this, I do this more with sketching, I think, but often what I'll do is like, if I think like, oh, this head is too big or too small, I'll just like do this, like to modify it. I also use the distort tool sometimes, where like, if I like want a different angle kind of, and like, if I think it like doesn't look good, like I generally again try to do this more with sketching, because like if you see like when I'm doing it now, it kind of like it just messes everything up. So I try to like do this all in the sketching portion. So I'll like finish doing some of this. So generally what I do now is I create a new layer underneath the line art, and this is where I'm going to put like my just like base colors. And to do this, I typically again use the round brush. And I like usually either do this just like coloring like with the brush, or sometimes I'll use the select tool and like select parts and then fill. But usually I just color with the brush. I generally try to just put down like flat colors and then not worry too much about what they look like, because in the next few like parts, I typically like draw over top of them using a clipping mask anyway. So if I don't like the color, like it doesn't matter too much. I do a lot of like kind of like shading, and also kind of just like playing around with the colors in general by adding in color to different parts. So like I'm just gonna paint this whole Shiba this orange color, and then I'll like adjust it later. I make a lot of use of like alpha lock and clipping masks to like be able to just paint on the layers that I already have painted on and not like go outside the lines. Hiiii and this Shiba are like similar-ish colors, so I know Hiii's not this dark, but again, like I think it's fine for now. I'll go ahead. I'm just gonna go ahead and like color in everything, and then I'll just change the color in a few minutes. I'll grab like a reference image of Hiiii, and then look at her color that way. I don't like ever like color select from reference images. I just like all the colors that I use, I pretty much just like base it on like what it feels right, which is like a lot of my art is just kind of on like what looks right to me, which is good, because I think it's like, you know, if it looks good to me, like that's all that really matters. But I also feel like I should think about like color theory more and stuff, and I think I've talked about this before, but I like genuinely don't. I just like pick colors based on like what I want to pick, and then don't worry too much about it. So generally now that I have like the base colors down, I'll create like another layer on top of it and create a clipping mask. And this is where I either start like playing around with the colors and adding like different colors in. For example, for the Shiba, I know that obviously his fur right here is going to be white. So instead of like playing around with like the, like instead of just using the actual layer, like the base layer itself, I generally like use this layer on top to make things like white, and it's nice because again you can color like this and it doesn't go outside the lines, so it just makes it coloring a lot easier. You could also just like alpha lock the original layer and do something similar, but yeah, so that's why this is really nice. And same with Evie, you can color her coat. So I'm going to color these guys a little more, and then I'll come back and talk about the multiply. Okay, so I think that's like fine for like base colors. So now what I typically like to do is I often like right at this step add shadows, and the way I add shadows typically to my drawings is I'll create a clipping mask again, and then I'll set it to multiply. And so for shadows, again, I just use the round brush. For shadows, I typically I either use like a bluish color usually, or a purple color. If it's on a person, I usually use a purple color, and if it's on like an animal or like just like an outside scene, I use like this color. Sometimes I'll like just like select like the color of the fur and just kind of like move it down to like a more gray, like desaturated version of that. But often I use like blue because a lot of times like these scenes are set outside. So I think like if you use like a little bit of a bluish color, like kind of gives it more of like that feel. So you can see it kind of looks like he's more outside as opposed to like where you're using this. And it's just like more dark. But I, again, typically use like this like more bluey color. You can probably see it better on the fur. Like it looks more purple when I do this as opposed to putting like this. It's more orange. So again, it's just like kind of up to your preference, but again, I typically use like that. Sometimes I use even like a reddy color, depending on like what I want. If I want to make colors like more fun and pop, it just depends on like the scene, I think. But I often like use, I think a lot more, I think I use like different colors in general, or like I try to use colors that are more like, I don't know, like not common or kind of like a little different. In general, like I'll often, after I do the multiply layer, what I'll often do is like, I'll show you, but I'll create like a new layer in between the multiply layer, like in between these two layers, like here. And then I'll kind of play around with like adding more like pinks or like blues, like to shadows, and things like that. So just I think it's fun to like experiment like that. But right now I'll just like color in like how I would color. So I would generally like color all this, like obviously, I often like at this point, so at this point I would often like use my reference to kind of like help guide. I think because these are like pretty small pieces and I'm just doing this quickly, like I won't go into too much detail, but the other thing that is I like to do is if I don't like the color of the shadow, I'll alpha lock that layer, and then like it's easy to like change this color. I kind of like this actually, like it's kind of like a more bright orangey color. I don't know, like makes it more fun. And then if I do it on Eevee, I don't like it on Eevee. So, and like, again, sometimes I set like, I'll make like fun, like different types of shadow colors. And I think like even just changing parts of shadows is kind of fun sometimes. So yeah, I just kind of play around with like different colors and what I like. And I often like will put like part of the shadow in a certain color, for example, and part of it in a not color, or in not the same color. What I also like to do is, especially on people, since I use this like purpley color as like a shadow typically, what I'll often do is like on the edge, like if I'm coloring this purple, for example, on the edge of a shadow, I like to put like kind of like the opposite-ish color. So like I'll put like a lot of orange right here. And like the reason I like to do it on like a person especially is because like it looks like skin kind of. So I'll put it on the edge of the shadow, and I just think it looks really cool to like have like that little like blending of color. And so I play around with that like with different colors. It's like right here even, and like around here. I just think it looks kind of cool. It looks kind of like iridescent almost. So I'll typically do something like that. I'll just leave this in here for now because I think they look fine. But again, so like after I do kind of these shadows, and these are like really, again, like rough shadows, but like once I do that, then I will typically, like I said, go back to this layer and like kind of have more fun with like the colors and just kind of like play around with it. So like I'll sometimes like make things more red. Obviously I'm not going to do that, but like that's the idea, is like to kind of like just play around with the color. and just see kind of like what looks like nice. I'll often put in like, again, like kind of like opposing colors, I guess. So like sometimes like for different like dark sections, I'll put in like some purpley colors. And like, I don't know, like that, like obviously is a little too much, but I think like that idea is kind of fun. Like this, I think looks kind of nice. But again, like this is just like my style. So obviously if you don't like it for yours, like that's totally fine. And then like after all of this, I generally create a new layer. I often don't clipping mask this layer. Sometimes I do. I will, just because like it's easier. It's gonna be easier to make changes. So like what I do often now is I do like more highlights. So to do this, I typically just like use a normal layer. Sometimes I'll use like either a add layer or a one of the light layers, like hard or soft light or overlay. But right now I'm just gonna use normal and just like select like lighter colors. I've been doing that a lot more recently, where I just like don't really do that like layer, change the layer type, and just do it like normal. I like to do like the little like that thing on characters a lot. So like kind of like the little like light effect, and I'll often do it on like their bodies, for example. So I don't know why I do that, but I think it looks, I don't know, I just like think it looks cool. But yeah, and so then I often with shadows too, especially on people, I will do like bright blue, like a teal or like a sky blue type color for shadows sometimes, especially on whites. I think it looks like cool to have that for some reason. I don't know why. I'll often also like outline shadows. So like for this, highlights. So for this example, I'll use a round brush usually. And sometimes I'll like outline the edge of the shadow or the highlight. I keep saying shadow, and just kind of like makes it pop more, and it like looks kind of cool. And I'll often do that in like this blue color, or sometimes I'll do it in like a pink color. Oftentimes like too, I'll like this, like I'll select the color and just like make it more like bright and saturated. So this is kind of like the plan. And then, so from there, I kind of like just like go back and clean it up a lot more. But those are like typically the steps that I use. The next thing that I often do is I alpha lock the the line art layer, and I change the color of a lot of the line art. So I'll change a lot of it that are in like this, like sun, for example. I'll change it to like to be brighter. And like the color that I use is often not like the color that like, it doesn't necessarily reflect like the color of like their actual, like what they are. Sometimes again, like I'll use like a bright pink, like here, I think like bright pink looks cool. But like, it just depends on like with the drawing itself. Like if I want it to be more realistic, I wouldn't use bright pink. I often also use the smudge tool with just like the round brush, the round brush selected, to like kind of like make it more of a gradient. And so like you can kind of like work it into like kind of how you want it. But that's like kind of the idea. And then like often too, I'll put like a darker, like if I want to make it more like fun, I'll put like like the purpley color or like a dark blue. And then when I have like really like these areas where it's like they're definitely it's definitely like in a shadow, I often just use like really dark black, and it like really pops when you like change all the other colors, for example. But yeah, and so this one's like getting out of control with my like, just because I'm showing you a bunch of stuff. So I'm gonna like clean it up myself, and then I'll show you kind of like how I would like the final what I like would consider, I guess, the final product. And then, but these are like the steps again that I follow. And then also I will usually at the end, like underneath like the base layer, I'll put like a kind of like if like they're on the ground, I'll put like a shadow layer underneath them. I think like that like generally looks pretty nice. And I'll usually use like a purple and like an orange color, kind of how I was talking about the shadows before. And I think like that like looks pretty nice when you do it like that. And maybe make it a little more gray, like underneath like the exact spots that they're under. And I think like that looks pretty nice. And so I think like in general it looks pretty cool. And then like also sometimes I will put like, just if I want to kind of like give it more of like a like feeling or whatever, I'll just like put like a little bit of splash behind it. I don't know, like that's kind of my process in general. Like I said, I'll clean it up a little bit, and then I might like finish this one down here as well, and then show you kind of what they both look like. But this one's a lot more complicated because there's a lot of Pokemon, so maybe I'll just stick to this. And then when I post it on Instagram, I'll put like both of them together. So yeah, and I'll insert a picture of like what the drawing looks like when I finished. So yeah, thanks so much for being here. Hopefully this was kind of like entertaining or informative. Yeah, so if you like this video, obviously like the video, and feel free to subscribe if you want more videos like this. If you have any comments, let me know in the comments below, or if you have any suggestions on how you color things or want to, chat about that, that'd be great. Yeah, and thanks again so much for being here. I really do appreciate it so much, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!